Oh, hello and welcome to the Mental Health Spectrum Part 3. If you've not seen Part 1 and Part 2, I would highly suggest it. This is the last of the personality disorders, or as you know by now, I call them personality response patterns. I think it makes more sense. Who am I? I'm Jesse. Welcome to my channel, Open Source Owners, where we talk about what if humans had an owner's manual. Wouldn't that be nice? Well, the mental health spectrum would certainly be a part of that. We have to kind of know the playing field that we're working in. So let's finish this part 3 right now, and we'll then have a decent understanding of the sort of general spectrum of personality response patterns as it relates to attachment theory. Okay, just as a reminder, here are the cluster A, B, and C sort of general groupings that, again, are no longer used in the DSM, but I think are still useful. We are now on cluster C. Part 1 was about cluster A, part 2 was about cluster B, and now we are on cluster C, which is about the fearful and the anxious behaviors. So there's 3. Obsessive-compulsive, that's different than obsessive-compulsive disorder, or OCD, okay? We're talking about obsessive-compulsive personality disorder here. Dependent and avoidant, okay? Those are the 3. Now, I want to highlight once again that I believe that it's much more comprehensible and it makes a heck of a lot more sense out of all these like disorders, and it feels less judgy and less shaming in a way to understand it as a way of a response pattern due to early childhood conditioning, aka attachment. And cluster C falls very neatly into the anxious attachment styles, as we shall see. Each of these 3 are sort of versions of anxious presentations that you might have seen in your friends and your partners and the people that you've worked with. If you're a therapist, you'll have seen it a bunch with patients with anxiety, and we call it generalized anxiety disorder, but often it's anxious attachment style presenting in particular ways. And these 3 particular ways are what we would then more technically label as a personality disorder connected to the anxious attachment style. So let's get into it. Okay, so the first one is obsessive-compulsive response pattern to anxious attachment. So it comes out of that anxiety place. Remember, this is not the same as OCD, as in what we've all heard of, like, oh, I have OCD. It's a little bit deeper. It's a little bit more pervasive in all of your relationships and all of your life's activities than OCD is. An excessive need for perfection, so very focused on perfection and control over not just your environment, though that might be part of it, but really in particular, the nature of your interpersonal dynamics, how you get along with other people, the types of things you do with other people. There's a preoccupation with details, rules, lists, and orders to the extent that you may miss the major objective of the activity. So Christmas family party might be like, instead of having fun and kicking back, you're very focused on how things should go. And okay, first we do this, then we eat dinner, then we do that. And if that's not flowing, you feel very disturbed, and you really want to gain control over that and make everybody conform to this is what we're doing now and everybody do it or else, right? That sort of thing. Not exactly fun at a party, but you know, it makes sense out of an extreme anxious attachment presentation to early childhood development. An excessive devotion to work at the expense of family or friends, a rigidity and an inflexibility with regard to your own morals or values or ethics, okay? And there's a really strong adherence to rules. It's very much a fragile world based on rules that keep it sane. And that, again, if you think about an anxious developing child who never knew where they stood and always felt sort of the anxiety of others and a general anxiety sort of ennui, then it does make sense that some people in particular will really cling to rules and cling to rigidity and cling to lists and cling to order to make sense of that anxious world that they grew up in. The inability to get rid of stuff. So this is what we call hoarding, right? Like newspapers and old clothes that you're never going to wear again, that type of thing. So this is the underlying presentation that actually makes sense of hoarding type behaviors, and the inability to be generous to others. You're mostly thinking about yourself, and you're mostly thinking about trying to control your interpersonal dynamics. So generosity doesn't really fall into that category, right? All right, next one, dependent response patterns. And this again comes out of the anxious attached style. Individuals with dependent personalities, so this is what you might think of as codependency. They tend to be very clingy and have difficulties accomplishing tasks and making decisions without the help of others. They rely on others to meet their own emotional and often physical needs. It's a very almost childlike dependency, even though it's an adult relationship. And often, in this case, the parent can become dependent on the child, so the roles get reversed. The child has to grow up and be the one who takes care of the physical and emotional needs of the parent, not the other way around. They tend to feel inadequate and helpless and can have problems in their relationships because of their near constant need for support. It's invasive into their life. It's not just occasionally I need more support than other people. It's a near constant thrum of needing support. If thrum is the right word, I'm not really sure. People with dependent personality disorder, or as we would call it here, dependent response patterns, have little trust in themselves or little confidence in themselves, and this can cause them to be completely reliant on a partner, even in the case of domestic abuse or domestic violence or a clearly unhealthy relationship, right? This, if we think about this as codependency, this codependent facet of the anxious attachment style will often pair up with the dismissing attachment style, which is sort of the hallmark of narcissism. And so these two tend to pair up. They're like puzzle pieces that fit together. The anxious codependent really needs to serve someone else. The narcissist really wants to be served by someone else. So they fit together like hand and glove, except when they both really need each other in emotionally vulnerable or meaningful moments. That's the exact moment that both of them can't do it. And so it's this oil and water relationship where it makes sense in one dynamic, but in another deeper dynamic, it'll never work. It'll never actually get to the place where they can both give each other what they need because of these pathologies that we're talking. And if you ever wonder why people don't just get out of abusive relationships when they find themselves in it, then this is a big feature of it. I mean, there's other factors, socioeconomic and whatnot, but this is a huge feature, this attachment pattern. And often these individuals were abused as children, so they have an attachment pattern that says abuse means love, abuse means connection, abuse is what adult relationships are. You know, they don't, in their brain, it just makes sense, unfortunately. All right, fear of being alone, a deep fear, I would say, existentially almost. Avoid taking initiative or responsibility in any dynamic. A hypersensitivity to criticism and a perception of criticism that goes to the core rather than, oh, okay, I'll just change this behavior. It goes to their very core. And a general lack of opinions. What do you want to eat tonight for dinner, honey? I don't know, whatever you want. What do you want to see for the movie tonight? Oh, whatever you want, I'm fine with that. That type of thing. And again, this is sort of, typically this is called codependency. That's not in the DSM, so we're going to go with a dependent personality disorder or dependent response pattern. All right, the last one, the avoidant response pattern. This one might be actually more connected to a dismissing attachment style, but of course it could also play with the anxious attaching style. Either way, this response pattern or personality disorder is revolves around social inhibition, feelings of deep inadequacy, hypersensitivity to any type of negative evaluation, so then they avoid it. They avoid any type of evaluation, period, because they don't want the negative. Anxiety about saying or doing the wrong thing, a need to be well-liked or perceived in a certain way, avoiding situations, not just to avoid it because they're anxious, but due to the fear of rejection specifically, not just I'm anxious in general, but like I don't want to set myself up for rejection or criticism or, you know, any of that type of stuff. Avoiding intimate relationships often. So again, that goes toward that dismissing attachment style. Just I'm going to pull myself out of the attachment game. And of course, they don't want to share intimate feelings, avoiding social situations or events, avoiding interactions in work settings, even turning down promotions and things like that to just keep things sort of where they are, where at least they have some semblance of safety or comfort. Avoiding conflict, being a people pleaser, that ties into the dependent sort of personality style as well, and low self-esteem. Continuing, there is a lack of assertiveness, extreme self-consciousness, viewing oneself as socially inept or inferior, a lack of trust in others, self-isolation, failure to initiate social contact, anhedonia or lack of pleasure or depression, you might say, anxiety in social situations, avoiding making decisions, vigilant for signs of disapproval. So vigilant just means always like paying attention, looking for signs of disapproval or rejection. Easily hurt by criticism, no close friends, or lacking a social network. We've sort of talked about some of these. Fearful and tense demeanor. So always wound tight. You tap them on the shoulder and they jump, like that type of thing. Now that could be other features of the human condition as well, but that's one way to understand this avoidant personality disorder. And misinterpreting neutral and misinterpreting neutral situations as negative. So mulling back over things and just perceiving everything through that negative lens. And that is it. Those are the 3 cluster C personality disorders, or personality response patterns, as I like to talk about them. And now we have finished that whole class of the DSM, which is the personality disorders. Again, they're all on spectrums. I don't think humans really fall into super strict categories all the time. I think we can mix things and match things. So, no one is going to have, and in fact, the way the DSM works and psychiatry works is we diagnose people by symptom clusters, not by like clear cut, obvious, everybody who has X has these exact same 5 characteristics. It doesn't work like that in human psychology or in human health in general. There's many factors. There's individual factors. There's historic factors. There's psychic. There's spiritual. There's social. It's a complex thing. But what this does do, and what the DSM gives us, and what we're talking about here in these videos, that it allows for us to understand general patterns, general themes. And not just that, but the way I'm tying it into attachment, now we actually have a way to make sense of it and then repair it, instead of just saying, oh, I'm messed up. I'm an avoidant personality. I'm so messed up. I'm such a bad person. Well, it's not really like that. You were responding to an environment that you basically had no other choice in. The body was responding often to life threat or very dangerous, the perception of danger situations. And you can't blame your child self, age 1, age 2, for forming worldviews about the world as it is so that you could survive. You cannot blame that version of yourself, even though our society likes to pathologize and put labels on people, and we like to individually beat ourselves up and self-criticize. But I'm wanting to elevate that. I'm wanting to move past that dynamic of blame and shame and personal guilt, and instead really understand it from a holistic perspective, from the whole of your life, and all the parts of what it means to be a healthy, happy human. Remember, I use the 4-part model: the biological aspect, whether your minerals and nutrients and all that stuff is working; the psychological aspect, your presentations, whether you've had trauma or abuse, your attachment; the social aspect, right? And the spiritual aspect. All of those things play in. It's a very complex thing being a human, and to have a more complex map, it will give us more insight and will allow us, again, I hope, take us off the hook of feeling that shame and blame and labeling as something that we need to do. In fact, I think we need to move beyond the labels and move to synthesis, wisdom, and understanding. All right, if you haven't downloaded the free 60-page ebook that I wrote called The Owner's Manual Part 2, please do so. Click the link below. It is for you for making it this far in the video as my way to say thanks. You can find that free gift in the link below. Just click the link below. Thank you guys very much for staying to the end. This was Part 3 of the mental health spectrum. Still talking about personality disorders. We are now done. In Part 4, we're going to move on to the mood disorders, and then we'll do a couple other parts on the anxiety and the psychotic disorders. And hopefully by that point, if you've watched all these, you'll have a pretty decent sense of where people fall into pathologizing categories. But more importantly, you'll have a pretty decent sense of all the people that you've known intimately with, all the difficult relationships you've had, all the challenging work environments you've had, all the self-doubt or self-hatred that you may have had will start to actually make sense. It actually comes from somewhere. It's not your fault. It's not their fault, whoever those people are, but it really helps to understand these demarcations. And then again, we can set boundaries, we can begin to grow, we can begin to change patterns. So on that note, thanks again. Please click the like button and subscribe to the channel. And please comment. Did this bring up anything? Does this remind you of people you know? Have you been through some of these cluster C traits before in a personal way? Tell us your story. Share those in the comments below. We'd all love to read. We'd all love to share. Thank you guys. We'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.